Hello there, today I'm here to give you a quick review of the RX 1700 XTX, the newest flagship GPU by AMD. Here it is. It's 2.5 slots, it's ever so slightly bigger than the previous generation RDNA3 on the 1600 XT and 6800 XT, which I had. For some quick specs, the card has the full Navi 31 XTX die with 6144 shaders, with a 2.5 GHz boost clock, 96 megabytes of Infinity Cache L3, and 24 gigabytes of GDDR6 at 20 gigabit per second, which gives it 960 gigabyte per second bandwidth. The TDP is 355 watts, and of course the memory interface is 384 bits. So what's the test system that I'm using? Well, I'm running it on an AM5 platform with a Ryzen 5 7600X, a B650M Riptide motherboard by ASRock, 32 gigabytes of 5600 CL36 DDR5 memory by AData XPG, and all the games and tests are run through a Samsung 980 Pro SSD, which is really fast, so there would be no bottlenecking problem there. So here's the testing profiles that I'm using, the performance profiles. I have a stock performance, and I will show you an undervolted plus overclocked performance comparison. So the stock profile has a 3055 core target, 2488 memory target, 1150 millivolt voltage, which is stock, and all of this it runs at the 350 watts, which is its TDP. And then I have the undervolted plus overclock profile, which runs at 3010 megahertz target on the core, 2680 on the memory, which is an 180 megahertz overclock. Oh, not megahertz, you understand me. And the voltage goes down to 1080 millivolts. The power limit is increased by 15%, and the power consumption improves to its maximum that this card, which has two 8-pins, allows currently, which is 400 watts, at least until more power tool gets released for this card, if it does. So let's start with the performance. We will start with a few synthetics, some 3D marked. I will not be here forever. We have Firestrike Stream and Firestrike Ultra, 1440p and 4K respectively. We have the stock 1440p at almost 40,000, 39,000 points, and the undervolted overclocked at over 42,000, which gives it an 8% gain. The 4K results is slightly over 20,000, but with the overclock it achieves 22,000 points, 22,006, which is again an 8% increase in Firestrike. For reference, a 4090 is about 25,000. So yeah, 3D Mark Timespy at stock, this card did around 28,000, which is really good. But when I undervolted and overclocked it, it went across the 31,076 point mark, which means it gained 10.2% performance, which is amazing. So yeah, continuing on, 3D Mark IV Royal, we have a stock performance of 15,100 points, which is over 50% of previous generation. I remember my 6800 XT struggling to achieve 10,000. It was like 9,700, 9,800 in its best day. This stock is over 15, and then with the undervolted overclock it goes to 16,500 points. So yeah, another almost 10% increase, 9.8% increase, really good. We're starting with games. Almost all of them are the X12. When I did the 6800 XT review 2 years ago, there were a lot more DX11 games, but now with the new generation of consoles and stuff, most games are the X12. There are a couple of ball contests in there, but most of it is the X12. A lot of Raytracing, by the way. So yeah, we have the Callisto Protocol, new game. It came bundled with the RDNA2 cards. It still does, if you want to get one at a discount. There are 6600s or 6800 XTs for really good prices. depending on where you live, of course. And so in this, you have in the 120 FPS range for the 1440p max settings without ray tracing, and it goes up by over 10 FPS by just doing the undervolt overclock, which is a 9.2% gain. And then the 4K is in the 60s. No, it's in the 70s. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact Excel numbers here. But as you can see, there is a nice gain as well if you do this. And now we're going to jump into the RT results. With max settings and ray tracing enabled fully, I've tested with FSR as well, because it gets really demanding. So at 1440p we go from 73, 74 FPS to 80 FPS with the undervolt overclock, and then to 85 FPS with FSR quality. It doesn't do much, so I play this game without it. And then at 4K, FSR quality does a bit more. It's at about 45, 46 FPS at stock, about 50 FPS at 4K, and then a couple more FPS to 52, 53 with FSR quality. This is on the in-game benchmark. So there's a 9.1% gain with the FSR quality undervolt overclock over the 4K stock results. Moving on, Halo Infinite. This game has no RT yet. As you can see in the graph, there we have a CPU bottleneck issue at 1440p, but at 4K you can see some more gains. The game is about 95 FPS at 1440p, regardless of its stock or undervolted. There are only two situations where we'll see a CPU bottleneck at 1440p. This is one of them. At 4K, the game is 85 FPS at stock and 90 FPS with the undervolt overclock. So it's a 5.1% gain. Moving on, Doom Eternal. Really good AMD title, right? It does really good. So as you can see, like the stock card does 339 FPS. This is max settings without ray tracing, full raster, ultra nightmare settings, 339 FPS, and the undervolt overclock is at 350, which is only a 3.7% gain, but hey, these frames are really high anyway, so it doesn't really matter. At 4K we go from like 220 FPS to 230. By the way, this is not tested with a benchmark because it doesn't have one. This is tested on the UAC Atlantica level at nightmare settings. Nightmare difficulty on the beginning, which is very taxing and very hard to play. So I did 3 minutes runs of that. That's where it comes from. Now we're gonna go to ray tracing. So we basically lose half our performance, as you can see. The stock card is about 170 FPS. And then the undervolt overclock card is 189 FPS. As you can see, that is a 9.4 FPS gain. If we go back to the non-ray traced, we can see that the gain is much lower, which means that at 1440p with ray tracing, the game becomes a lot more demanding. So the overclock gives us more performance. And at 4K, we are well beyond 100 FPS. It's like 108 stock and 112, 113 overclock. You cannot notice it, but it's still over 100 FPS at 4K with ray tracing. So yeah, next game is Cyberpunk 2077, The Fabled. We have another CPU limited situation. 1440p stock is bumping around the 124 FPS mark. The undervolt sees us losing a bit of performance, but hey, it's still great. So just leave it at stock for this. And at 4K, we are at 63.8 FPS at stock and 69.8 FPS when undervolted and overclocked. So we gain 9.4% performance, which is great. Moving on, ray tracing. You know this is hard. You've seen the slideshows. You've seen how NVIDIA has a massive lead in this without any upscaling, but I'm gonna test it anyway. At 4K with full ray tracing, ultra ray tracing, everything is maxed. We are at like 38 FPS out of the box. When you undervolt and overclock, it goes up to 42. And then when you, on top of that, do FSR quality, then it gains a massive ton of performance. It goes to 70 FPS. And that's pretty good. You can play that. The lows aren't, it doesn't fall below 60 FPS often. And when it does, it's like 60, 58, 59. If you have a FreeSync monitor, you're gonna be fine. Then at 4K, it's only 19 FPS out of the box. It goes up to 21 with the undervolt overclock, which is a 10% gain increase, which is good, but still the frames are really low, so we have to enable FSR for it to be somewhat playable. With FSR quality, we go up to 37-38 FPS, and with FSR performance, we go up to 58 FPS. But FSR performance looks kind of bad. I wouldn't recommend going to it with a $1,000 GPU. Stick to FSR quality and just enjoy it, have fun. Next game, The Witcher 3 Next Gen. This is kind of broken. You're gonna see that there are no overclock results. So what we have is basically a CPU bottleneck again. It's around the 90 FPS mark at stock on 1440p. This is with Hairworks enabled and all the Ultra Plus settings which are new in the menu. And then it's again around 90% at 4K, 90 FPS, sorry. And then if we enable RT, which is kind of broken again, we are bumping around the 40 FPS mark at both 1440 and 4K. As you can see, there's a massive optimization problem in this game. But I managed to get the 1440p undervolt overclock results up to 44 FPS, which is 9.2% gain. Not bad, but these results aren't where they should be. This game needs some more optimization, because right now it sucks. Next one, Metro Exodus. You have 1440p stock, it's right around the 110 FPS mark, bumps up to 120 when you undervolt overclock it. 4K, all of these ultra settings. It's around 62-63 FPS, and it goes up to over 70, 71, 72 when undervolt overclocked, which is 9.1% gain. Nice. And then if we enable the extreme settings, which has full RT, it becomes a lot more demanding. As you can see, we are at around 75 FPS ish, 74, 70, yeah, and it goes up to 78, 79 with the undervolt overclock. But at 4K there is a nice gain where it goes from 42 FPS at stock to 46, 47, which is an 8.4% gain, probably 46 FPS. Next game, Borderlands 3. As you can see, at 1440p, the game doesn't really care if we undervolt overclock it. All of this is the X12, by the way, except for Doom, as I said. We are at around 120 FPS, and then at 4K, we have 101 FPS baseline at stock, which shows you only 20 FPS loss from resolution change, which means there was a bottleneck. And then when you undervolt overclock that at 4K, you get up to 112 FPS, which is a 10% gain. We love to see 10% gains. Control on Raster, not ray traced. We are up at around 175 FPS out of the box, and then it goes up to 189, 190 with the undervolt overclock. At 4K, we are right around the 85 FPS mark, and it goes up to the 90 FPS mark with the undervolt overclock. At 1440p, we're seeing a gain of 7.4%. And with ray tracing, there's a massive hit in performance, as you could expect. And we see about 82 FPS at stock and over 90 when undervolt overclocked. And at 4K, we are bumping around the 45 FPS mark, 42 to 45, and it goes up to the 50 FPS mark with the undervolt overclock. So you should try to find some upscaling if you want to play at 4K with ray tracing on. The massive gain, this is the biggest gain in any game that we've seen. 1440p from stock to undervolt, it goes up an 11.5% increase, which is great. Final two games, sorry. COD Modern Warfare 2, as you know, this game is a beast on Radeon cards. It's beating the 4080, it's beating the 4090. I'm just focusing on the raw performance of the card. We aren't comparing it to anything else just yet. So we are close to the 200 FPS mark, around 190 at stock, and it goes up to 210 with the overclock. This is ultra settings. Then we're gonna do extreme, which is just a tiny bit lower. At 4K, we have 115 to 220 FPS out of the box, and it goes up to 127 with the undervolt overclock. which gives it a 9.1 FPS increase, which is nice. And extreme settings, it's much the same. We are bumping around the 180 FPS mark at stock, maybe 185, and then 205 to 2010 with the Undervolt, and at 4K it's like 110 to 120. We just lose a bit, and the gain at 4K is an 8.5% increase. Final game, Quake 2 RTX, infamous for being a full path trades game, just like the new Portal RTX. So that's really demanding, even if it's a 1998 game. So we have two performance metrics, one with global illumination at low and another with global illumination at high. With GI at low, we are at about 99 FPS at 1440p stock and about 110 with the overclock, very close to that. And then at 4K, we are about 45 to 46 FPS stock and 51 FPS when overclocked. That gives us an 8.4% gain at 4K. And with global illumination at high, we see a massive performance loss, and it's at about 72 FPS out of the box, 1440p, goes up to right around 76 with the overclock. And at 4K, which is really demanding, we're about like 38 out of the box. No, I mean like 35 out of the box to 39 out of the box, 38. It's like a 9% gain, which is good, but this is really demanding, so I would play at 1440p in this game. Now we come to the most important part of this video, which is one that many reviews haven't been doing, and I recommend you watch this one. I'm gonna put time marks in the video. It's extreme undervolting, because everyone has been testing with like 1080 millivolts, 1050 at max, but you can do some really extreme undervolting at the minimum that it allows, which is 700 millivolts, and you then just have to find stable frequencies. As you can see, we have the stock profile, and then we have the 700 millivolt. It has a target of 2250, a memory target overclock of 2680, same as the overclock benchmarks. The voltage is at 700 millivolts, and the power draw is between 220 and 290 watts, depending on the test. As you can see, the core target is massively different, but as you're going to see, the performance difference isn't going to be that big at all. And I'm very proud of this. 700 millivolts versus stock. As you can see from this graph, we have performance ranging from 87 FPS of stock performance to 100 FPS of stock performance. Normally about the 95% mark. So we only lose about 5% performance on average, with a couple below 90%, but most of it on the upper echelons of that. As you can see, the power draw is at a minimum 230 watts in Unity Heaven to a maximum of 290 watts in Control. But you have a lot of 250 watt results from like Port Royal, Cyberpunk, and Modern Warfare 2 and Borderlands. So this is all great. As you can see, we can massively improve the performance per watt, and if you do this on this here reference card, the fans will go from like 1700 to 1800 RPM to like 1300 to 1400, and at that point it becomes almost silent. So if you want to have a profile for playing games at 24/7, this is what I recommend. And I just gave you the numbers to input into Radeon settings lower there. So try this at home. This is very safe. You get lower temps, you get very low noise, and of course you shave off up to 100 or more watts over the stock. So as I said, performance per watt goes up massively. Next part, I'm gonna do a very quick gen-on-gen upgrade. I have done a couple reviews on this channel, old reviews of a 6800 XT, and before that a Radeon 7. So I have a couple tests to compare the same settings, because I don't have the cards anymore. I sold them. I would love to have money to keep buying these very expensive cards and keep them, but I had to sell them when it came the time. When the time came, I mean. Of note, the Radeon 7 and the 6800 XT were tested on a different system, the one I had back then, which had a Ryzen 7 3700X and DDR4 3600, but it's 4K tests, so I don't know how much difference there will be at that resolution. So let's go. As you can see here, the stock 7900 XTX on Borderlands 3 max settings, badass, is 59% faster than the 1600 XT and 3 times faster than the Radeon 7. The Radeon 7 was undervolted. It wasn't at stock because that was the settings that I had 24/7 on that card, which made it more efficient as well. RDNA3 is basically Vega 2.0 in its current incarnation. So yeah, with the undervolt overclock, we go up to plus 75 over the 1600 XT and plus 229.5 times. I mean, 229% faster than the Radeon 7, so over 3 times as fast. Next test, and the last one for this kind of test, Doom Eternal 4K Ultra Nightmares preset. You have the the RX 7900 XTX at 65% faster than the 6800 XT and at 183% faster than Radeon 7. And with the undervolt on top, you have plus 69% performance of the 6800 XT and plus 190% of the Radeon 7. So, conclusions. I'm going to shave this in 3 parts. First is the performance conclusion. We have great raster performance. The other bigger reviewers, which had 48 tests with, showed on average a 5% improvement over an RTX 4080 out of the box, and it costs about $200, €200 less here in Spain, €200 less. So it's 5% faster. That's at stock. You have seen all the gains that we have had by undervolting overclocking it. So that could put it at a 10-15% over 4080 easily. But of course, 4080 can overclock as well, but not that much. So all in all, it has better price to performance than Nvidia. That's good. That's great. The ray tracing is good, as you saw. All the games are playable. You can do a lot with it, but it's not as good as Nvidia's because the Ada architecture has a ton of compute, and it just slays. And of course, Nvidia has all the software support in the world for developers to develop for their architecture. So it's good, it's usable, it's great. You can enjoy games. I enjoy the Callisto Protocol a lot with ray tracing. It looks fantastic. But if you have a ray tracing game that you enjoy a lot, you could be looking at an Nvidia card, even though you're going to be paying more for it. So that's depending on what you want to do. Conclusions part 2. This is a bit of an architecture rant. It's RDNA3 gimped because AMD gave us 50 to 70% faster than 6950 XT. And we just saw those kinds of numbers, but not against 6950. We saw them against 6800 XT. So there has been something going wrong, right? There's some problems with power draw. It basically, from what I've seen online, has to do with current. If you go into hardware info, it shows you that it demands 448 amps of current, which makes it run a lot more power than it actually needs, as I showed with the overclocking, with the undervolting, extreme undervolting testing. The clocks are inconsistent. Some games you're going to see 2300 to 2400. Some other games you're going to see 2900 to 3 gigahertz out of the box, like Halo Infinite. Some tests like Unity Heaven are going to be 3 gigahertz almost out of the box. And then some other games, the majority I would say, are going to be like 2500 to 2600. All of this is at stock, of course, on the reference card. Expect different results from different cards. So what happened? We don't know exactly. But there's probably some issues on a software level, which the Radeon team is working on the holidays. And there's probably some issues on a hardware level. So the question is, will there be a 7950 XTX? Yes, of course there will be. There will be, because we know that the architecture can go up to 192 megabytes of infinity cache. And they only gave us 96 megabytes on this one. So I think they could do 3 things basically. First of all, they can give us more infinity cache. Second of all, they can fix the current so the card demands less power and can clock a lot higher. We've seen reports of 3.2 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz. The maximum I've seen on a synthetic benchmark is 3.15 gigahertz on this card. Well, or not on this card. We're gonna see. So there will be a 7950 XT. How much faster will that be? I wager quite a bit, because it's gonna be massively faster on the core. It's gonna be more efficient, and it's gonna have more infinity cache. we could see a 20%. We could see a card that would be on a 4090 or 4090 Ti level. And that's why the 7900 XTX is still at $1,000, the same price of the 6900 XT. Final conclusions, the reference model overall has been really good, but I have to say it's not as good as the RDNA2 one was. The 6800 XT was quieter. I know this has a higher power limit, and that's part of the problem. This card, when you try to overclock it and undervolted, it has three problems. First problem, it runs into the 400 watt power limit because of the two 8-pins. Well, because of the BIOS, of course, because two 8-pins could do more than 400 watts, of course. And that limits your overclocking. And then there's a massive issue with the hotspot temperatures. When you have the card on this side, there are some samples that have hotspot issues where the core is at like 60 C, but if you're overclocking it, you can see 110 C on the hotspot. This card does have it, unfortunately, and I'm not gonna open it and repaste and void word and risk voiding warranty for that. So this is a problem, because when it hits 110 C on the hotspot, even though the core itself is cool, it's going to throttle and you're going to lose performance. It's going to become more inconsistent. And finally, when undervolt overclocked, this card has to go 100% of the fans to keep it kind of cool, and that's very noisy and that's kind of annoying. So we saw three limitations or problems with the reference design that kind of prevent this card from reaching its full potential. I wonder if there's a solution to this.